Hey y'all, I'm Elisa, the Scrappy Wife behind ScrappyWife.com, and these are the rules for destashing your space. Spring is certainly the time for cleaning out almost your whole home, and that includes your craft space, your creative room, whatever you want to call it. And when it is time to clean out and refresh your space, destashing always comes up. So what is destashing? That means you're going to go through all of your supplies, all of your tools, and you're going to figure out what needs to stay and what needs to go. And that there are some rules that you can use to help you through the process, because it can be overwhelming no matter what size your space. It can be overwhelming to kind of go through everything and decide and part with things. And so I thought I would share with you some of the rules that I follow when I am destashing. Okay, so rule number one for destashing your space is everyone has to destash. It doesn't matter if you have a big craft room like this or if you have a small section of your dining room. We all have to destash from time to time because our space dictates how much we are able to have. So if you have a limited amount of space in your house for your craft items, then you're going to have to destash from time to time, because we always have an influx of new supplies. There are always things that are inspiring us. We're creative people. There's going to be things that come in on a regular basis, and more often than not, we are bringing in more supplies than we are actually creating with. And so that's going to cause kind of a backup, kind of a space overload, if you will. So everyone has to destash. And even if you have a large space, just because you have a larger space generally just means there's more things to destash, because it can really easily get out of hand. You can start stuffing things in different places. Just because there happens to be an open shelf doesn't mean that the supplies on that shelf need to stay. You want to keep things in your creative space that you are actively using. Everyone has to destash. Rule number two for destashing: there is no magic container, magic storage system that is going to let you conquer a space that is completely overstuffed. Don't buy containers until you have destashed. You're going to be able to tell whether you have too many supplies for your space. I see a lot of times on Facebook groups and on Instagram where people are asking for storage solutions, and they're hoping that there is a magic bookshelf or a magic set of containers that will allow them to store all of the things that are overflowing onto their floor, that will allow them to store that easily in their space. And sometimes containers can help, and having the right container does make a big difference. But more often than not, it has to start with destashing. Don't go buy containers. Don't go buy a magic storage system. Don't go buy anything until you have destashed. It can feel pretty obvious how much is going to fit in your space. If your shelves are overflowing, if piles are gathering on the floor, if you cannot see your work surface, then you're going to have to destash. You're going to have to let go of things. And I know it's hard to do, but you will be so much happier in the long run when you have space to work, when you can see your supplies. Letting go of things is actually going to allow you to use the supplies you have a lot more. Rule number three: it's time to let go of old hobbies. This is something we are all guilty of. We are creative people, so a lot of times we try new things. Maybe you used to be a 12 by 12 scrapbooker and now you do journaling. Maybe you loved Project Life back in the day and now you do something a little bit different. You need to let go of old hobbies and the supplies that go with them. My story that I use all the time is, for a while I was very into wood burning. I thought it would be so cool to be able to burn into wood projects and draw into them, and I thought it was very cool and I enjoyed it, and I had all of the supplies that went along with wood burning. But that was only for a season of life. That has changed. I no longer do that. It was time to let go of those supplies. If I'm not doing that hobby anymore, it doesn't deserve the real estate in my craft studio. So it's time to look at what you are actively doing, the hobbies that you are actively interested in, and reserve space in your studio for those things. That can be hard, and that can mean even going through something like a collection of metal dies. Maybe you have a huge collection of metal dies because you used to do a ton of card making, and that might not be your style anymore. Maybe instead of card making, you are doing scrapbooking, or vice versa. Some of those metal dies, while yes, they kind of overlap and correspond, some of them are definitely geared more towards card making. Some of them are geared more towards scrapbooking. It might be time to let go of the ones that you are not using because you're not doing that hobby anymore. Rule number 4, do not overstuff your space. Your supplies need room to breathe. They need room to be able to look and see what you have. When you completely cram a shelf full of paper where you can't even see the individual papers, where you don't have room to flip through it, you're not going to use those papers. It's too hard to get into that shelf and to work in that system. Your supplies need space to breathe. You need space to be able to go through your supplies. So just because it fits on a shelf, just because you can cram everything into a drawer and it still closes, doesn't mean that that's the correct solution. You need to make sure that you can thumb through your supplies. You need to make sure that you can easily pull a box down from a shelf and not 14 other boxes are going to fall down. You have to have room to breathe. And yes, the size of your space is going to dictate how that works. If you have a smaller space, you still have to have room for your craft supplies to breathe. You don't want them to be overstuffed in the space, because as soon as they are difficult to get to, that's going to feel overwhelming. That's going to create a bigger mess as you are starting to craft, meaning maybe you're getting down one particular die. Well, do you have to take down 3 different boxes in order to get to that metal die? Then do you have to move things around? Like, are you creating a huge mess just to get one thing cut out? If that's the case, you need to rethink your system and how things are stored so that your supplies have the space they need for you to get to them without having to do like Olympic training to get to your supplies. So don't overstuff your space. I promise the more you can see your supplies, meaning the easier it is for you to get to them, the more likely you are to use them. If you have shelves, if you have drawers that are so stuffed it's hard to look through them, you're going to opt not to actually go into those drawers, and those supplies are going to continue to collect dust, and you're going to continue to bring in new supplies because you have no idea what's on the shelf because you can't get to the shelf. So it's kind of this vicious cycle. Clean out your supplies, make sure everything has room to breathe, and then you're going to get to use your treasured supplies even more. All right, rule number 5 kind of relates to rule number 4. Remove seasonal supplies. So this is a way that I allow for space in my craft room, for a little bit more moving space, for a little bit more space to breathe for my supplies, is I box up seasonal supplies and move them out. So we're talking holiday supplies, Christmas, Halloween, things like that. Things that are specifically summer that I would have no use for in the fall, things that are specifically fall that I would have no use for in the spring. I remove those from my space every season when the season is changing. And the reason I do that is so that the rest of my supplies have room to breathe. I box them up, I put them in an extra closet, I move them to the garage, I very clearly label what is in those boxes, and then I can pull them out when I'm ready to work on that seasonal project of some sort. That allows for my everyday supplies, the supplies that I'm reaching for so often, that allows them a little bit more space and allows me a little bit more breathing room. That also makes the supplies that are coming in and out of my craft room feel fresh and new. When a new season comes, we tend to get really excited. I know for me, that is with Christmas crafting supplies. I get super excited when I see Christmas crafting supplies in the stores and online, and I want to just buy all of the new things. before I buy, I go pull out my box of Christmas crafting, start to unpack it, and it already feels like I'm getting new supplies, already kind of get that rush. And so it ends up saving me money because I feel like I've shopped my stash and I feel just as excited for those supplies because I haven't just looked through them for the past year. They're like new to me in that moment. And so that has helped me save money on seasonal supplies, and it just gives me more space in my craft room. So take your seasonal supplies, pack them up, clearly label them, and then pull them out. I even mark it in my planner in September, in January. I mark the times that I plan to pull out those seasonal supplies, and that just helps me stay on track. All right, rule number 6, getting into the nitty gritty. How do you decide what to de-stash? I tend to use the 1-year rule. I know some crafting friends have kind of lengthened that out to the 18-month rule, but as you're going through your supplies, if you haven't used that supply in a full year, I get rid of it. There are some supplies that don't need to stay because maybe they were just there for a season. Maybe you were excited about that supply. Maybe it didn't end up working out like you thought it was going to. It was a special new product. If you haven't used it for a year or thought about using it for a year, it's time to let that one go. That includes paper collections, that includes stickers, that includes all kinds of things that they're just lost in your stash. You just don't know that they're there. And if you haven't used it for a year, odds are you're not thinking about using it for the next year. Now, I have some paper crafting friends that have extended that rule out to about 18 months because they tend to craft in a seasonal flow, you might say. They might have seasons where they do a ton of scrapbooking, maybe in the winter when they're at home. They might have seasons where they switch over to sewing crafts. They might do they kind of switch through some different hobbies. So it might have been a year since they've done some serious journaling and they haven't used those supplies, but they know that come summer, that is something that will happen again. So they kind of extend that out. They just make sure that they haven't used that supply within the last season of crafting, then they're willing to let it go. If it's been sitting in your craft room for so long and you haven't used it, odds are you're not going to use it in the future. So I prefer to have the space instead of an older supply that's collecting dust. All right, this rule is a little bit controversial. Rule number 7, take the time to destash your supplies, but don't do just that. This is a rule that has let me feel a lot more freedom when I'm organizing my space. Crafters, creators spend a lot of time organizing. I don't know what it is about the connection in our brains between creativity and organization. I feel like they really do come together, but we can spend a lot of time organizing our space. And sometimes we put these artificial rules on ourselves that we cannot create anything until everything's completely in place. And then it feels like organization is a punishment. And that is not a feeling that is conducive to like enjoying the process. So set aside time to destash, set aside time to organize, but also set aside time to create. When I have friends or patrons or subscribers talk about a long organization project, maybe they really do have a craft room that is so packed and so overflowing, it can feel really overwhelming. Set time every day, every week. I plan to spend 2 hours this weekend working on organization, and then I'm going to stop, and then I'm going to do the thing that I love, which is creating. Give yourself permission to have those creativity breaks. If you are limiting yourself to only organizing and you're not going to create in your space until everything is done, you're going to tend to rush through to the end of that organization process, to that destash process, and it probably won't be done to the best of your ability. So set aside some different time. Maybe you're going to organize one bookshelf this week, and then you're going to have fun in your room. And then you're going to organize another shelf. And divide it up like that, setting those kind of time limits, setting those time constraints, and then giving yourself permission to also enjoy the thing you love, the reason you want your craft room to be organized, because you want to create in that space. So enjoy the creativity. Don't spend all of your time organizing. Destashing, especially if you're starting from scratch, is a huge process. Maybe I'm going to destash one bag of supplies, and once I fill this bag, I'm done destashing for today. And then next week I will destash again, another bag of supplies. Set those kind of little milestones along your journey and then have fun in your space. All right, and the last rule for destashing is a destash means no buying. So as I'm going through the destashing process, I do put a rule that I'm not buying anything during that time. I don't want an influx of supplies as I'm trying to get rid and make space, because if I'm buying a bunch of new stuff, it's kind of this weird cycle. Sometimes it feels like when we're getting rid of things, we're like, oh, now we have so much room, we can buy a lot of new supplies. Live with it for a hot second. Don't bring in new things right as you're destashing. And that goes for craft supplies, craft tools, organization systems. We talked about that before. Don't buy the organization systems. Don't buy the boxes. Don't buy the shelves. Don't buy any of that until you have destashed. Destashing is a no buy time. That can be difficult. I completely understand, but it's an important rule to kind of put in place some important boundaries because it can get confusing. If things are coming in the same time things are going out, it can be a lot and it can be overwhelming. Take the time, destash, give yourself a no buy period, whether it's a week, whether it's a month, whether it's 2 months. Keep yourself a list. If you have things you want to buy, make yourself a little wish list, because that'll be another goal to kind of work towards. Hey, when I finish destashing my space, then I'm going to get to look at some of the things on my wish list. Keep that there, add things into your cart. Just don't press buy. Finish the destashing process first. So those are my 8 basic rules for destashing your craft space. It can feel like a lot. It can feel overwhelming for sure, especially when you're in the middle of it. I want to urge you to keep going. It feels so good to organize your space. It definitely spurs on your creativity, so you can do it. I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the rules you follow as you are destashing? Let me know down in the comments below. And what are some of your stumbling blocks? What are some of the things that make it really difficult for you to destash, to get rid of some of the supplies in your space? Let us know down in the comments below. This is an amazing community, and you're going to be shocked at all of the tips and tricks that you can read down in those comments. So I can't wait to hear from you. I do want to give a huge shout out to all of my Patreon members. They are a super fun, crafty crew. And if you want to join us and receive some of the perks that you can get over on Patreon, make sure to check out the link for that down in the description box below. All right. I hope that you have a fabulous day. And as always, keep it creative.